You are endlessly frustrated when it comes to reading in a foreign language. Words just don't make sense. Even when you learn them, they don't make sense on the page, and you just find yourself so unfulfilled, so frustrated with any kind of reading you're doing in the language you're learning. And after all, you're learning the language. You should be better at it by now. And it's just difficult. It's the worst. And unfortunately and fortunately, the reason is actually quite simple, and it's so simple that I can teach you it in this video, and not just teach you why you can't read properly, not just teach you how to be better, but actually show you how to skyrocket your ability to read in a foreign language and enjoy it as well. So in this video, I'm going to describe and explain basically how to become better at reading in a foreign language and in the language you're learning, and all of that kind of jazz. So right now, it's probably very difficult. You can't understand stuff. It's frustrating. It's a waste of time. You feel it's a waste of time. You don't feel as if you're making any progress, which means a lot of the time you probably aren't. You're anxious that, you're investing your time into something that isn't going to pay off. And these are all completely normal things to think. It's completely normal to worry that this stuff isn't paying off and that it's, be angry that it's frustrating. But I want you to remember that being able to read in a foreign language is a skill. And like any skill, as we drill this home on this channel, any skill can be improved. Any skill can be built upon. Any skill can be grown. And that's exactly what we'll do in this video. It's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do as someone who has taught themselves languages before, and is quite good at, solving problems in this regard. So in this video, I'm basically going to teach you all about that. That's what we're going to do right now. And if you stick around until the end, I'll have a bonus tip on how to find high quality reading content. But yeah, definitely hit the subscribe button, guys, and let's go. So what actually is the problem? I think breaking down the problem is really, really important, because I think what a lot of people do is they go straight away after a half-assed solution without even really trying. They probably put in about a quarter of the effort required to find a solution, and they haven't identified the problem. So overall, they've put in like less than an eighth total effort into problem solving. That's not how you fix problems. And in fact, if you're constantly frustrated with language learning, that's probably why, because you don't know how to problem solve. And I mean that respectfully. Most people, I'm still learning how to become a better problem solver. But let me explain what's on the screen right now, because this literally outlines why reading is so difficult for you, and it's going to completely change how you see it, and you're going to feel so much more intelligent after watching this, because you'll actually understand where a lot of the pain is coming from. So let's look at the native language side first. I've basically broken the reading process down into your native language and the foreign language you're learning. If your native language isn't English, it doesn't matter. I've just put the UK flag there, which isn't even the flag for England, so probably not the most accurate thing, but whatever. So you start off top left, you try reading, you engage in some reading. When you're reading, the brain recognizes words. This is your native language. The brain recognizes words that it's learnt, and it's seen the words many, many, many times. And then because your brain is able to recognize words, the task is effectively successful. You're conveyed a bunch of emotions, images in your head. When you read the word water, obviously that word has a connection to the actual water in real life, and so your brain basically gives you that image or whatever, that sensation, and you feel fulfilled because it's not difficult. You understand what it is. Whatever goal you are reading for is fulfilled, whether it's to understand a contract or reading for pleasure. It's fulfilled. It's pretty straightforward. That's how reading in a native language works. You've never thought about it, but that's how it works. Here is where it gets interesting. Reading in a foreign language is not actually the same thing, and I'll explain to you why. So we start off the same. You're trying to read something, you start doing the reading task. Your brain has a really hard time, depending on how difficult the text is and how good you are at the foreign language. It doesn't recognize a lot of words. It's unable to find the relationship between words, to convey to you the meaning of the text, that all of that kind of stuff. And as a result, the task is unsuccessful. You don't feel fulfilled from reading because it wasn't fun. You can't understand the words or whatever your objective was with reading, and you feel unfulfilled. And unfulfilled is another word for you feel like shit. You feel terrible. You feel like you haven't learned anything, and it's just frustrating. And that is, this cycle here on the right is probably the cycle for you. You've probably picked up a book that you thought was actually pretty easy, or a text, and you've tried reading and you just didn't understand words, and it was frustrating, and you felt like you couldn't actually speak the language. And this is so common, but I want you to pay attention to the title of this slide. This isn't actually the problem. This is the symptom. You feeling unfulfilled because you can't understand what's going on in the text is actually the symptom, it's not the problem. The difference between problems and symptoms is that the problem, obviously it's a problem, it's bad, but the problem is the causation factor. The symptom is what happens. Your engine, for example, or your car leaking oil or petrol or anything like that, although it's a problem, it's bad. It's not actually the problem, it's the symptom. The problem is that there's a hole in part of your car. That's the problem. So now that we understand that this really is the symptom, what is actually the problem? What is causing you to be so frustrated slash not very good at reading in a foreign language? Here is the real problem. You are trying to read in a foreign language the same as you would in English with lower stats. And what I mean by lower stats is, I'll explain it properly in a second, but I basically mean you're worse at the foreign language, obviously. So here is the equation for pain. Obviously, we've established you feel unfulfilled, frustrated, anxious that you're wasting your time. This is what happens when you try reading a foreign language currently. And here is the reason why. It's a combination of your native language attitude. You try reading in the foreign language with your native language attitude, and you also have low proficiency in the foreign language. If you had high proficiency in the foreign language, just like in your native language, obviously you have high proficiency in that, there wouldn't be a problem. But it's this combination of these two things that is causing such unfulfillment. That is the problem. You're going in with the wrong attitude, and don't worry because I'm going to explain on the next slide. And you have low proficiency, which I'm also going to explain. So now that we understand that this is basically what is causing the pain, this is the problem. This isn't the symptom, now we're looking at the problem. What is the solution? How do we actually solve this problem to eliminate the pain, to improve our attitude, to improve our proficiency, etc.? It's actually so simple, it's funny. And I'm going to explain what you need to do, and then I'm going to tell you the actual implementation of the things you need to do to achieve this. So here is the solution, and don't worry because I will explain. As we established here, these two things result in pain because when you do these two things together, you can't understand the text and you feel unfulfilled. Imagine for a second that we got rid of our native language attitude, our attitude of, oh, we can just read a text easily, understand everything, it's, enjoyable, we understand all the words, it's easy. And we replaced it with a new attitude, an attitude that we didn't understand every single word, but we were going to read anyway. And don't worry because I will explain all about attitude and higher proficiency on the next two slides. But if we replaced our English attitude with this new attitude, even if we weren't any more proficient at the foreign language, it doesn't matter because we're actually going into reading that text with a completely new attitude. We're not concerned with understanding everything. And what that actually results in is growth. And the same with this, if we keep our English attitude, but we improve our proficiency in the language, well, it doesn't matter that we have a native language attitude because we're proficient in the foreign language now. And that is also good. And then what happens when you combine both of these things? Once you have this new attitude of growth and you're more proficient in the language, you get a special thing, and that's called language learning. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't actually language learn. They waste time on shallow work tasks, they do a bunch of other bullshit, and they're unfulfilled overall. They don't achieve their goals. So now that we understand that the solution is to swap parts of this equation out, let's actually talk about how to. So new attitude, what do I mean by that? Because that might confuse you. What I mean by old attitude, your native language attitude, is you're expecting to be able to read extensively with ease. And this video does contain a lot of new information, so if you have any questions, by the way, feel free to comment down below or join the free Discord server and we can chat one-on-one and I can give you a hand personally. But what you're basically trying to do is you're expecting to be able to read the text extensively. Read the text with ease, which obviously you can't. Extensively means reading for pleasure, by the way. So when you read it in English extensively, you're not concerned about the relationship between the words. You're just reading for pleasure. You're understanding the plot of the text, or if you're reading in a foreign language, you might only understand the gist. If you're not particularly advanced, you just might not have a rough idea of what's going on. But you're not focused on the words. You're expecting to be able to do that in the foreign language and understand every single word, which you have to understand is a very high level skill. To read extensively without focusing on every word and the endings of every word and how they fit together, and to understand all of their meanings and the entire plot is very, very advanced. You're only able to do that in your native language after years of doing it. And so what happens when you're unfulfilled that you can't read extensively with ease? Every single person watching this right now has done this before. As soon as you try reading a text and it's difficult, you immediately switch to intensive reading, which is the opposite of extensive. Intensive reading, as I've defined down here, is reading analytically. You're looking at every single word. You're trying to make sure you understand every single word, the relationships between words, how all this, syntax and how the grammar of the words connects and all that kind of stuff. The semantic value between words, all this really complicated stuff that you probably don't even know what those words mean, but that's actually what you're trying to do when you read intensively. You're trying to understand every single word by looking at it intensely, and what this actually results in is you get even more frustrated because, again, you don't understand the words, you're not at a highly proficient level like you are in your native language, and of course you get really unfulfilled, frustrated, etc. So what is the solution? Well, we obviously need to implement this new attitude, and there's basically 3 points to implementing the new attitude that is actually going to bring you a lot more fulfillment, growth, even without being proficient in the foreign language. Because obviously, we can't snap our fingers and be proficient in the foreign language. We need to start, attitude comes first. We need to start actually implementing this, and then we can improve our skills in the foreign language. So first, I want you to understand that you do not need to understand everything. And that might seem obvious, but I guarantee you it's not. You do not need to understand everything in the foreign language that you are reading. In fact, you actually need to understand very little to have a rough idea of what's going on. To get the gist of a text, the gist is basically like, it's less than the plot, it's just an idea of what's going on. The plot of a text might be, there's this, people are cooking in the kitchen and this problem happens and they have to go buy this food or this equipment to fix the problem. The gist is that, it's about a kitchen and food and there's some family. It's lower down than the plot. You really only need to get the gist when you're reading. If you can't even get the gist, then potentially the text is too hard. But if you can get the gist, that is all you need. And it's very hard to get the gist when you're focusing intensely on every single word and trying to understand everything. So what I want you to do is to read text at what I call the comprehensive input level. Comprehensive input is basically reading texts that they're not so difficult you can't understand everything, but they're not so easy you understand most of it. They need to be at a level in between that, and the reason for that is because you want to actually be growing. If you understand everything, great, but you're not actually learning new stuff, you're not exposing yourself to unfamiliar stuff. So I want you to actually understand that when you read a text that you don't understand everything that's going on and it's kind of frustrating, that's 3 points towards your learning. That's you actually growing. That's like a runner's legs in pain after running because they're getting stronger, because he's getting faster. That's literally what's happening when you're learning a language. And the second thing I want you to understand is to use intensive and extensive reading strategically. Intensive reading is kind of like a special attack. You shouldn't switch to it immediately as soon as you don't understand what's going on. The only time you use intensive reading is to acquire new words and also potentially to understand like the grammar between words, but that's a little bit more advanced. So you want to use intensive reading, which means focusing on the words, to make lists of words you don't know and memorize them. And if you want to learn more about that, I'll have a video linked in the description to the input repetition method, which you can check out afterwards. But intensive reading, where you scan words analytically, you look at the relationship between words, how verbs are conjugated, etc. That is literally to be used only to understand and acquire new words to boost your proficiency, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And by the way, if you don't understand what things like verb conjugation are, semantics, syntax, some of the key terms that I've mentioned in this video, I also have a link in the description to my course, the Language Learning Accelerator, if you want to check that out, and I'd highly recommend you do that. But the third thing I'd say for building a new attitude is to use extensive reading most of the time. You use extensive reading for fun, to familiarize yourself with texts, to go over texts again, to make sure you actually understood properly and to improve your understanding, and to lock in words. Once you've learnt new words, that's not the end of the road. You need to continue exposing yourself to those words so you can lock them into your long-term memory. And yeah, that is basically all there is, but you cannot be perfect. But you can make progress. You can't be perfect, but you need to be making progress, or else you're not even going in the direction of perfection. Everyone can go in the direction of perfection. But that is how you build a new attitude, a stronger attitude. Let's talk about how you can actually raise your proficiency, how you can be better at reading in a foreign language. What I want you to understand is reading is what is called a macro skill in language. And there's basically 4 main macro skills of language learning. You've probably heard them before. Reading, listening, writing, and speaking. Those are kind of the 4 mediums you communicate in. And those are the 4 areas we want to improve in if we're getting better at a language and learning a language. So, as I said before, like any skill or any stat, you can actually raise your level. You need to kill the fixed mindset that you can't actually get better at reading. It's too difficult. It's frustrating. People are scamming you. It's a waste of time. That isn't true. You can do that, and I'm going to explain how right now. So to get better at reading, we basically also need to do three things. We need to acquire more words, and we do that by reading intensively, as I said before, and using the input repetition method, which is too complicated to explain in this video, but it's basically a method of using intensive reading to make word lists, put them into flashcards, memorize them, reread the text, and then hey presto, you actually understand more words. But I'll leave that linked in the description for you to check out afterwards. The next thing that you need to do to get better at reading is to improve your understanding of grammar. And by grammar, I basically mean the rules of the language, what words can go together, sentence structure, that kind of thing. And yeah, it can be, depending on how difficult the language is, how similar it is to your native language, this could be quite open and closed, or it could be very, very difficult if you're learning. I'm learning Russian at the moment, which is quite difficult from an English speaking perspective, and not even an English speaking perspective, an Australian speaking perspective, so I kind of have off to a disadvantage there. But yeah, if you can improve your understanding of grammar, some polyglots and stuff on the internet will recommend only consuming content and not studying grammar. That's complete bullshit, terrible advice. You should study the grammar of a language, not religiously, and certainly not on its own without actually reading and stuff in the language as well. But you should have a notebook, you should be taking notes, you should be learning about verb conjugation and grammatical topics within the language. All of that stuff I teach within my course, which you can check out in the description. And the third thing to do is just to grind at the language. You need to be reading constantly. Even with extensive reading, you will actually improve at the language because your brain is very, very good at noticing patterns and building on things that you already understand. So just remember, as long as you're extensively reading for fun, you're getting the gist of the thing, you are actually making connections and understanding words. And yeah, you will make progress over that. And I just want you to de-stress as well. You can randomly translate words sometimes with your phone. You can just stop, translate a word on Google Translate. You can use parallel text. You can have another book open next to you. You can listen to an audiobook by reading. Just while reading, just enjoy yourself. You don't need to stress so much. You're not under the pump. You don't need to learn immediately. You don't need to learn in 24 hours. I think everyone in this generation has been basically hijacked and tricked into thinking that there's cheat codes, and if you're not learning super quick, you're missing out on that kind of stuff, and it's just rubbish. But I will give you the bonus tip I promised you at the start right now. And the number one reading tip I could give you that will boost your progress is to read things you enjoy. Not just to enjoy reading, but to actually read things that you enjoy. And particularly things that are free and that you've already read in English. So there are tons of websites right now with free practice resources in every language. I'll link lingua.com below, but if you want a hand finding resources, comment down below and I'll give you a hand. But there are tons of websites with free practice resources in every single language at various levels. You can find Wikipedia pages on any topic in basically any language. You can read about, I can read about the government, I can read about Harry Potter, I can read about the gym, anything that interests me. And the final bonus tip, part of this bonus tip I'll give you, is setting some kind of material goal is good, I think. And not just, I'm not saying materialism is good, obviously. It's not necessarily good, but there are times when it can come in handy. And for me personally, when I was learning Italian, the second language I learned after my native language, I set the goal of buying this really expensive Italian version of Harry Potter, which I really like the series in English and I'm familiar with it, and that was super motivating, especially once I read it, because not only was it fun, but I'd also read it in English, which is that tip I've just left above, and so it's really motivating to have something like that, and I would recommend that to everyone. But yeah, if you are truly interested in learning a language and you want to take it further, check out the link in the description to the Language Learning Accelerator. I've got a few other links to be useful. I hope you did get a lot of value out of this video. Good luck, and thank you for watching.